Okay, I have with me today Colonel Daniel Davis. We're going to be talking about the Russia-Ukraine war. We're going to be talking about Zelenskyy and China and Putin and how this war is going and where we think it's going to go so that we can hopefully have this thing over with. Colonel Davis, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So this morning, over the last 48 hours, there's been a lot of talk about these 4 Russian aircrafts that have been downed, potentially by the U.S. sent Patriot missile system. There's some confusion around whether this story is true or not. Can you let my audience know what you know about the situation?
Actually, as of just about an hour and a half ago, the best information I've got is that it was actually the Iris-T system that was used by Ukraine. They've gotten those from a number of different sources. Germany, United States, and I think a couple of others have donated some of those systems. And evidence appears that Russia kind of got into a predictable pattern for how they would launch a lot of their air-launched missiles into Ukraine. And they started using the same locations, et cetera. Ukraine figured that out, and then they got some of these systems into place covertly in along the flight path, so that when the aircraft came into that zone, they were basically waiting for them, and it was an ambush, and they set them up, and then Russia just walked right into it. And the way these missiles work is that they are actually launched before they start turning on their radar, so that they can't be detected very early. And it looks like they were very successful. And by the time the Russians figured it out, they had seconds, and it was too late to do anything about it. And they did, in fact, apparently lose 4 aircraft.
Okay. Thank you. So basically, they became too comfortable in their flight path. Ukraine noticed the pattern recognition and used it to their advantage.
They did, yeah, because Ukraine as everyone knows, is definitely doesn't have as much air defense as they want, and they've been paying for it all over the country because the Russians have been able to launch missiles from all different kinds of places, all different kinds of systems. And Ukraine is between 30 and 40% successful on a general basis. When you look at what's really happening, despite what the government officially says, which is usually they knock them all down. But what happened was that Russia gets complacent with that, because the Ukraine have been trying to have their air defense at this target location as opposed to at the launch location, and Russia was not prepared for that, and they paid for it pretty significantly in this case.
Okay. There's also talks about, on the flip side, Russia being able to take out a U.S. Patriot system. Do you have any details on that?
There is some anecdotal or some inconclusive video evidence that something was amiss with the air defense system that was launched out of Kiev this morning. Some evidence suggested it actually was destroyed, but of course the Russian side is saying that it was. The Ukraine side saying it wasn't. And it's probably going to be a while before we know, and we may not ever know, because Ukraine has been very effective at suppressing any kind of local video evidence to upload. They've almost criminalized people from doing so. And it's very effective because they don't want the Russian side to know whether they were successful or not, nor do they want those kind of videos harming their own motivation, their own morale. So they kind of suppressed it. So it's really unknown at this point. It's too early to tell, but something clearly was amiss in Kiev this morning.
Okay, great. Thank you. You've recently written an article that I felt was able to strike a very fair balance between what Ukraine needs to do in order to survive and get Russia out of their country, but at the same time pointing out the strength of the Russian Federation army and the moves that they're making. In that article, you said it's becoming more clear that the West believes Ukraine won't be able to kick Russia out of their country completely. Why do you think that shift in thinking is happening? And are we going to end this thing in a bloody battle, or is it going to end with a negotiated settlement?
I fear it's going to be a hybrid. It's going to be a bloody outcome leading to a negotiated settlement. Something that there could have been a negotiated settlement Actually, the war could have been prevented. There were many opportunities to prevent this, not the least of which was the Minsk Accords, but there was other opportunities before that. The war didn't need to happen. It could have turned into a negotiated settlement in the end of basically a month, a little over a month, in Istanbul in March of 2022. But for various reasons, part of it apparently was Boris Johnson sabotaged that right after the meeting. And encouraged them to continue fighting. That's what's reported by numerous sources. We don't know for sure, but what we do know is that immediately after that, Zelenskyy just completely changed his tune. And then after that, Putin likewise just said, okay, there's no more talking. We're going to try to win this on the battlefield. And that's what both of them are doing. Now, the current situation right now is when we're ostensibly waiting for Ukraine to launch this either late spring or now it's almost summer offensive. The problem is that since October, when Ukraine did genuinely catch Russia with their pants down and have that very successful drive in the north around the Kharkiv area where they sent the Russians reeling back over 100 kilometers, they finally stabilized it in the Svadovo Crimea area along very near one of the rivers up there. Russia stabilized that in about October, and since that time, the lines have hardly changed at all, just a few changes in the Wagner area, which I'll talk about in just a second. But for the most part, Russia has said, okay, they mobilized 300,000 people and they started building an offensive capacity from new units, most of which are in the far western part of Russia on the Russian side of the border. Some are also in the Crimea area, also training, but they're out of contact. Meanwhile, they have been basically keeping the line static along that 1,000-kilometer front, and then they have been building elaborate defenses in depth over hundreds of kilometers in those regions, many belts of really classic Soviet doctrine, what they used to do. They're now putting those into great effect. Any offensive that tries to go into that is going to have a very, very difficult time. And there was actually a very odd, in my view, opinion piece in the Washington Post yesterday by retired Army General Mark Hertling, former commander of the 1st Armored Division. In it, he lays out almost verbatim to what I've been arguing for months about how difficult the path is for the Ukrainian side. The difficulties of conducting combined arms operations on a large scale, something they have never done, ever in their history. Even the Kharkiv area was not done to the scale of this type against an enemy that's dug in, has multiple belts of defensive, is prepared. The offensive side has insufficient air power. They have insufficient air defense. They have limited artillery support against an enemy that has air superiority, meaning they have more of the air power. They have more air defense. And they apparently have no shortage of ammunition, despite what some people say. The evidence on the ground says otherwise. And that is the most difficult task any army could do. And as General Hertling points out, this would be a tough task even for the United States, even for an elite Western force. This would be a very, very tough task with no guarantee of success. And yet somehow he, in the very next sentence, says he has confidence that Ukraine is going to win, which is irrational and illogical. And there's no juxtaposition in there that explains why he lays out this very difficult task and then just confidently asserts that they'll win, other than to say, I know the Russian army, presumably meaning they're terrible and they're bad and they're going to run, or who knows what he may think. But there's no evidence of that. Here's something that doesn't get much talked about. In fact, I've never seen it mentioned anywhere. Russia certainly has had a lot of missteps. They were forced out of Kiev in the Kharkiv area within the first month of the war. They were driven back in September from Kharkiv area all the way back, and then they abandoned Kherson City also in October of last year. So there's been some pretty major setbacks for the Russians, and there's no question about that. However, in every area where Russia has chosen to stand and fight, Ukraine has never pushed them out to date. And I mean nowhere. Russia, when they started getting attacked in Kharkiv, they withdrew back to a defendable position. When they were not having success in the Kiev area in the early part, they withdrew and put their forces back in the Donbass, where they wanted to fight from there. And when they left Kherson City, they moved back on the eastern bank of the Donetsk River to put in defensive positions where they have remained to date. Everywhere else that Ukraine has tried to attack, they have not succeeded anywhere. So when you want to compare what's actually happened tactically on the ground where Russia has chosen to fight, Ukraine has not been able to stop them, and they have definitely not been able to drive them out beyond any local counterattacks that may have happened, like in around Bakhmut a couple of days ago, where they have some tactical gains, but we'll see if that turns into anything else. But when you're now saying that Ukraine has to do something that it has not done in the entire course of the war and on a large scale, and then drive all the way down to Melitopol and potentially cut the land bridge to Crimea, in my view, in my experience, and I've had experience fighting armored warfare, I've had experience training troops for armored warfare in the European terrain. What they're asking is almost impossible. And unless Russia does just literally collapse for no reason, and I see no evidence of that, militarily, it is just almost impossible for Ukraine to win. So if they attempt to do so, almost certainly they're going to suffer extraordinary casualties and probably not succeed. And as I point out in that article you referenced, this is their one shot. It's taken them the better part of a year to get this force in place, to get it trained, to get the men recruited, to get all the weapons from the West, to get them in place physically. And if once this one peters out, whether it succeeds to moderately, whether it succeeds really strongly, or whether it's stillborn and gets crushed at the starting point, either way, any of those outcomes, that's it. They don't have another offensive force for who knows how long, maybe a half a year, maybe another full year. Russia, on the other hand, if they absorb this shot, they reportedly still have 150 to 200,000 troops that haven't been engaged yet. And if they then move forward, what does Ukraine have to stop them? I don't know. But in no case, no scenario is Ukraine going to drive Russia out of Ukraine. I just don't see any means that they're going to do that.
Okay, thank you. I mean, you've got the battle experience. You've got the running through these scenarios over and over again with top military leadership. So I appreciate that insight. You had mentioned in the article that the West needs to make some actionable changes. If you were advising President Biden or Lloyd Austin or General Milley, what would be some of the key military actions that you believe that they should take right now in order to give Ukraine the support that they need?
Look, I've been writing about this from the outset, and it's been a pretty consistent message all the way through, and it is today. We need to recognize the military reality on the ground, that Russia is not going to be defeated militarily. And in fact, even if you wanted to say the extreme unlikely chance that Ukraine started success and actually did put Crimea at risk, the chances that Russia would not use tactical nuclear weapons is just almost not even rational to consider. They almost certainly would. So if Russia did start to seriously lose, then the chance of acceleration into nuclear weapons goes through the roof, which of course is not in anyone's advantage. I mean, that would be potentially catastrophic for mankind. So any way you want to look at it, there is no military path for Ukraine to win. Given that reality, then what is the strategy? What is America's plan here? If we recognize that, and I believe that they do, because many times even General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, has said, I don't see a path for Ukraine to completely drive Russia out of its lands. So, and then he put some caveats on it. But the fact that he said that indicates to me that he recognizes the same thing that I do. There's other generals have said the same. If you recognize that, then you need to have a plan that could succeed. Because what we're doing now is having the verbal fiction that Ukraine is going to win and we're going to support them as long as it takes, which is like the catchphrase that Biden and other officials have been saying for many, many months. But as long as it takes to what? You're not going to drive them out. So then what's the value here of just continuing to give some weapons, but not enough really to even to be able to say rationally, yeah, this is something that could happen. Ergo 31 Abrams tanks we've given. And look, that's a single battalion of tanks. That's not enough to do anything on a 1,000 kilometer front between two armies. So that's not going to do anything. And even even the 100 and something Bradley fighting vehicles and I think the similar number of Stryker vehicles, those are modern stuff. But again, those are in relatively small numbers for an army. And that's not going to do that either. But then you have to ask, then what is the objective? And what is the strategy? What do we want to attain? Because right now, it honestly doesn't look like we have one. We're just throwing stuff out there and we're like, okay, maybe we can get rid of some of this, or maybe we can afford to lose some of these, but limited numbers, because of course all these are coming out of our stockpiles, and the more of this you give, the more of the weapons and ammunition that we give, the less that we have in the event that we need them. And of course many people are raising that flag, and it's very valid. But given that is the case, then how about we do something that can succeed and say something that's good for America, then ultimately is good for the NATO alliance, which are our top two priorities, not Ukraine. Ukraine, we can help Ukraine, but that's number 3 priority, not 1 or 2. That's US and NATO, because we have obligations there. So what can work is, look, Russia has been significantly harmed because of all the losses of the thousands of armored vehicles, the probably dozens of different aircraft they've lost, and certainly the hundreds of thousands, or probably in the hundreds of thousands of killed and wounded troops that Russia has lost. So it's going to take them many years, probably closer to a decade, to recover just to where they started here. Meaning we're not at any threat of Russia going anywhere to the west, into NATO, which so many people want to throw up, but that's a straw man. That's a fake argument, because they don't have the capacity to do so. Given that, then let's negotiate, or let's send our diplomatic power behind the scenes first to both to Kiev and to Moscow, and saying, hey, this is not going anywhere. Nobody's going to be able to win a clear, decisive military victory. Let's bring this thing to an end as soon as possible and find out what is the minimum acceptable level that both sides can live with. And then let's bring the killing to an end, so that no more Ukrainian citizens have to die unnecessary deaths. No more Ukrainian servicemen. No more Russian servicemen have to die because their two leaders can't figure out what they're doing, and they just keep throwing them into this meat grinder, and they continue to die. Ukrainian cities continue to get leveled. It's just catastrophic. And the longer this goes on, the more people are going to die. The longer it's going to take to rebuild afterwards. And it's still going to probably end in a negotiated settlement regardless, no matter how it is. It's whether it was March of 2022, whether it's today, or whether it's another year from now. You're still going to almost certainly end up in a negotiated settlement. Why not do it today, where you can cut off the possibility of escalation, the possibility that something bad happens and this thing spirals out of control, which is going to be in the case, the possibilities as long as the war goes on. And then say, look, let's just do whatever is necessary to bring these two sides together that hate each other. Neither one of them wants to give up. Neither one of them will get all they want, but both of them can get something to where they can at least stop the fighting. That certainly is not going to guarantee. Let me just say right off the bat that that another fight won't happen later, and that's certainly possible. But that will be on us diplomatically in the international community to keep that from happening. And there are some things that we could try. But what we do know is if we keep going down the path we're on, we're going to fail strategically, and many more people are going to die unnecessarily. So given those realities, this is the path we should go down, a diplomatic attempt to end the war, instead of just this blanket, let's keep going for as long as it takes.
Yeah. It's almost like, in business, you strive for a win-win situation. I don't know that we can even get a win-win, but could we get a didn't lose, where they both feel like, hey, listen, I'm not getting what I want, but you're not getting what you want, but the killing ends. Every time I think about, because I heard I think it was like midsummer, that Boris Johnson had told Zelenskyy, do not sit down with these guys. Do not seek peace. And I think now, how many more people have died because of his decision? And he's not even in office. He was literally removed for being a terrible leader during the lockdown situation. Colonel Douglas Macgregor has talked about, one thing that Zelenskyy could be trying to do is, if he feels like he's losing, is to try to pull a NATO nation in to strengthen his side, right? like, okay, we keep getting depleted. Could we pull somebody in? Is there a situation other than an attack on a NATO nation where NATO leadership would say, we are going to put boots on the ground, we are going to put men and women of uniform in Ukraine, or is that completely off the table?
I don't think that they would do it openly, for obvious reasons that could draw the alliance into a war. And certainly, we don't have unanimity. The 31 NATO nations are eager to get into a fight with Russia. In fact, almost none of them want to. But I can see them trying to finagle it to try to do something different, like say, we're going to send some peacekeepers into Western Ukraine, or we're going to send trainers, and something under the guise of something else, but send some troops in there. Zelenskyy absolutely wants to do that. He's been actively trying to do that from the beginning. That's why he just came back from a European tour where he's trying to get commitments to be invited into NATO this summer in July at the next meeting. And he's been lobbying and trying to get that for all kinds of time, really since the beginning of this. He wants to have that Article 5 guarantee so that everybody will come to his aid, which, of course, that's insanity because he's at war. And so if you brought him in and signed him in, then, of course, then Article 5 is triggered that very instant. And that's not going to happen. Nobody's going to sign up for a war against Russia. They want to keep it contained into the Ukrainian territory. But there are some other possibilities. There is continued talk between Poland and Ukraine. They continue to talk about forming these joint forces and having this, some kind of quasi alliance of some sort, sometimes diplomatically, sometimes militarily. That's unclear. And there is the possibility that if things go poorly with this offensive and then the Ukraine side starts to lose, the scenario I painted where the Russian that 200,000 force starts to move to the west and actually starts to succeed maybe this summer or fall, then there's the possibility that Ukraine may say, hey, Poland, I need you to come to my bilateral help, not as part of NATO, but as a bilateral help or volunteers. There's many things it could be. And I agree with Colonel Macgregor on that's a risk. And the longer the war goes on, the longer people are tempted to think that might be a good idea. It's a terrible idea, and we should just discount it as categorically. Shouldn't even consider it under any guise. But there do appear to be some people who do give that some consideration, and that's something that we should be very careful not to do. And if there's any thought of doing that, then the Congress has an obligation to the American people to have that voiced and discussed before one boot of any type is sent there, because that could easily cause a war that we would then be stuck with. And before that happens, the American people need a voice if they want to go to war. Of course, they don't, but let's make sure they get that chance.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we're not really consulted, as you know, in the Middle East. It's really what do the top generals and the military industrial complex want.
Unfortunately,
okay. Yeah, let me ask just a couple more quick questions and then I'll let you go. I know how busy you are, so thank you. Is there any scenario in which Russia uses nuclear warfare on Ukraine, or is it only if there is an attack on Russia itself that justifies a retaliatory situation with nuclear missiles or something like that?
Russia has been very outspoken from the beginning. Numerous officials in kind of giving tacit warnings of nuclear weapons without being too direct, although Dmitry Medvedev has a couple of times. But in my view, there is only two possibilities where Russia would use tactical nuclear weapons, neither of which is in effect at present. One is if we attack Russia with the nuclear weapons, and then of course they're going to respond immediately. The second one is if the NATO provides so much success and so much capability to Ukraine that at some point, against all the odds that I've argued already, that they do start to be physically driven out of the country. And if anybody talks about moving them out of out of Crimea, or even further out of the Donbass towards the existing internationally recognized Russian border, then I think the chances go through the roof that they would, because I can't imagine that Putin would allow his army to be driven physically out of the field and not use any of the tactical nuclear weapons at his disposal that he has. I don't know that he would survive in power, because there are so many hardliners in Russia that already are saying that. In fact, many of them suggested that maybe that Putin needs to start thinking about doing that now and quit worrying about what might happen, which is nonsense, but that there are some voices like that. They're on the fringe right now. But if their forces are getting driven out and Putin can't stop it, you can count on those voices to rise. So as long as Russia doesn't lose or we don't attack them, then I don't think there's any chance that they would use nuclear weapons, because they know that if he did, then he would be receiving some, and that would be catastrophic for his country.
Okay. Yeah, that was the only scenario I could see, was if maybe Ukraine, as part of their peace negotiation, as they want Crimea back. I don't think it's going to happen. I think that's a pipe dream. But if they were to actually go into Crimea, Russia would consider that a direct attack on Russia, and that could trigger something. Other than that, I don't know that we need to worry about them sending in just into Ukraine, because they have so many other weapons at their disposal.
Right. They don't need to right now.
At this point, they don't need to. Okay, great. Thank you. I mean, that's reassuring that, the American people, we're not over there. We don't know. We want to end the killing, and yet at the same time, you don't want a monster to morph out of Russia that could be big or worse than it is right now. Thank you so much, Colonel Davis, for coming on. Your time is valuable. Thank you for your service to our country, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to share.